States.
All right, Chair Heberlein, we're ready when you are.
Oh, great. All right, I guess it's my turn. All right, I call the April 13th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting to order at 6 o'clock. All right, can we get roll call?
Chair Ron Heberlein.
Here.
Vice Chair Jennifer Willard. Here. Cameron Messbaugh.
Here.
Aaron Woods.
Here.
Brianne Kaczynski. Here. Oliver Gallagher. Here. And Andrew Carr. Sorry.
Here. No worries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. All right, will staff lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Do you want to start us?
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all.
Thank you, staff. All right, citizens input. This is the time that citizens have the opportunity to address the Planning Commission regarding any item that is not already scheduled for a formal public hearing tonight. Therefore, if any member of the audience, either here in City Hall or via Zoom, would like to speak about any work session item or any other matter of concern, please raise your hand or send a message to the recorder using the Zoom chat function so that we may hear from you now.
So Chair Heberlein, we do not have any citizens in City Hall here to provide comment, but we are checking the Zoom function.
No one's raised their hand.
No one has raised their hand? Okay, so we have no one raising their hand to testify on Zoom either.
All right, we'll move into the administrative matters and consideration of the March 9th, 2022 minutes. The March 9th, 2022 minutes were previously distributed. Does the commission have any corrections to the minutes? All right, seeing and hearing no remarks, the minutes are approved as distributed. All right, now we can move on to our work session. And it looks like this will be a staff presentation for the airport-related comp plan amendments.
Yes, thank you, Chair Heberlein. I believe I have turned my video on. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you and see you.
I'm just going to rename myself for the public in case anyone's watching, if you will bear with me just for a moment. Okay. It's fun to be switching seats, playing musical chairs, and changing roles during the meeting. All right, Chair Heberlein and Commissioners, my name is Miranda Bateshell, Planning Director with the City of Wilsonville. I just briefly want to introduce this topic and where we are in this project, and then Chris Green from HHPR, who you've met before, will go ahead and take the presentation from there. So just as a reminder, this project aims to add policies to the city's comprehensive plan. As you know, the primary purpose of that document really is to set the city's long-range vision, goals, and policies for the city and the land that we control within it. This is slightly different. As you know, the Aurora Airport is adjacent to the city. It's out of the city, it's in the county, and it's out of our control. However, due to the proximity of that airport, we are impacted by it, and as an impacted jurisdiction, we can participate in planning efforts that occur at the airport. It's very similar to a lot of the functions that we have where we participate, the city and county participate on projects together and coordinate and collaborate in areas like the urban and rural reserves, where we're trying to either protect land or we're trying to bring land eventually into the urban growth boundary over a 20 or 50-year time horizon. And we're making sure that we collaborate in a way where that is done well and efficiently and meaningfully. So this is somewhat similar in that regard in terms of coordinating on mutual areas of concern or interest, and making sure that we both grow together well or participate together well. So the importance of taking the action that we will take in adopting these comprehensive policies is that when we do participate in those planning efforts or in ongoing regional coordination efforts, that we have clear direction that's adopted in our policies and that we have that policy direction in our comprehensive plan, that we clearly know what our interest is and can communicate that at that table. So the last time that we brought this topic before you, we were about to go out and conduct outreach. So tonight we are going to provide you with information from the feedback that we have received through those efforts, and then also get input from the Commission on initial draft policies up for consideration in the comprehensive plan. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Chris Green from HHPR.
Thank you. I will share my screen here. All right. Can everybody hear me and see my first slide? All right, thanks.
We can hear you. We're seeing your presentation or your slide view mode. There you go.
All right. I always get those mixed up. Thank you. Yeah, so last time we had a work session on this project. It was November, so a lot has happened since then. And here to, as Miranda mentioned, talk about the community engagement, some of the feedback we got out of that process, beginnings of an approach to draft policies and some of the reasoning behind that, and maybe some of the links from what we heard through the community engagement process, and then the actual draft proposed policies that you have in your packet. This is kind of a first draft of these, and definitely meant to get feedback, but we're moving pretty quickly, so wanted to actually dive into that content. In terms of community engagement, Let's Talk Wilsonville was pretty instrumental in having online engagement during a time when we couldn't have a lot of in-person events or weren't sure if that was going to be available early on. And then Boone's Ferry Messenger, another tool that kind of publicized the project, but most of our outreach has been virtual on this project. One of the big pieces of that, kind of the broadest outreach we had in terms of participation, we had an online survey in February through March that was promoted in the Queens Ferry Messenger. We had 100 respondents. Not everybody answered every question, but it's kind of handy because even though the program tabulates your responses for you, it makes the math pretty easy. In terms of who responded, it was almost all Wilsonville residents, which isn't surprising considering it was, advertised to residents. About 1 in 4 of those folks that responded used the airport in some way. There's a pretty wide variety of how they used it. Flight school, pilots, different business or work related. It was a pretty wide distribution of those that did have some sort of connection to the airport. In terms of what people responded with as issues, the people were asked to prioritize or select issues that were important and then prioritize among those. And neighborhood compatibility, so noise and pollution from aviation ended up being the highest ranked in that survey. It's not necessarily surprising given that it was mostly a survey of residents of Wilsonville. There was a wide range of responses to open-ended questions, so that was helpful. There was recognition of some impacts that were positive and negative from the airport out of that, and a lot of kind of addressing the economic impacts of it, potentially noise, safety, both positive and negative. There was a really wide range, but the one thing that was really captured is that neighborhood compatibility. Stakeholder interviews, so we've talked to quite a few stakeholders that are specifically have an interest in this project, whether they are businesses or farmers in that area around the airport, firms that operate at the airport, government agencies, nonprofits in the area, so a pretty wide range. And we did learn some kind of specific insights out of this. And some of those were impact of the airport on transportation access for farming operations was highlighted. The importance of that quick to market for some of the farm products in the French Prairie was one of the things that we picked up on. Existing infrastructure at the airport, there was some concern about stormwater and then the septic systems at the airport maybe not being adequate for the level of development that's there currently. Wilsonville, as providing goods and services to these firms based at the airport, so we heard a lot that employees of companies based at the airport get supplies in Wilsonville. They get some professional services from Wilsonville, and then employees, this was like where they would go eat lunch a lot of the time, so there was that economic relationship. And then the role of the airport in emergency management planning that's going on in the region, having that as a kind of a backup way to bring supplies into the area in the event of, say, a Cascadia earthquake or that type of event. And then we had online community conversations, so basically open houses in March. This kind of coincided with the time that the survey was open, kind of helped us get that word out and vice versa. We had the March 9th open house at noon, and then the March 10th one in the evening to try to give folks two different options as far as when to attend using the Zoom webinar, Zoom webinar format. So we were able to give a project overview, do a little bit of live polling. It was a lot less involved in the survey, but it gave folks a chance to kind of get involved a little bit, and then Q&A with the project team. There wasn't a huge amount of participants in these, but airport noise and then industrial development near the airport were two of the things that came up in those conversations. We have the full survey report is in your packet, and there's a lot that we've learned, but if we were to really distill it into two kind of topics here that have come up that are related but not necessarily the same, positive and negative impacts from airport operations. So aviation activity, planes, both, things that people like about that and don't. That was one big topic and probably not surprising. There was some concern about further development near the airport because there is the what's called through the fence, so firms next to the airport can use those facilities, and there's other reasons why companies would want to locate near the airport. So that was something that it's related to the airport, but not directly, say, aviation related, that was a concern. So we've talked a little bit about what the process can do and not do, and developed this flow chart. It's a very high-level overview, but kind of to give that sense of there's an airport planning process going on right now, and that, you see in the left column there, lives in the realm of requirements from the FAA about how to plan for airports, the Oregon Airport Planning Rule, and then Oregon Department of Aviation, as the owners and operators of the airport, does a master plan that talks about what's going to happen on that site, the operations, et cetera. And then in this other column, not as focused entirely on the airport, but you have comprehensive planning. And so this is where, this process really fits in, is these good neighbor policies that are in the comprehensive plan, and those can relate to both aviation, but then also development in that area of the airport that was identified. And out of those two processes, the future of the airport and the area around it is influenced in different ways. So in our approach to draft policies, we wanted to have some kind of guiding ideas. We wanted to make sure we reflected that feedback that we received in the community engagement process, addressing both the aviation-related issues and those land use and development concerns for the area around the airport as much as possible. Provide a clear direction for the city, as Miranda mentioned in those regional conversations, understanding where the community is coming from and being able to represent that. But at the same time also knowing that there's a pretty wide range of situations that could come up in the future and having a little bit of responsiveness to that. Realizing that there's a lot of jurisdictions and regional coordination needed to address these issues. So you've got multiple counties, the metro jurisdiction that Wilsonville is a part of, and then the airport is outside of that metropolitan planning area. So lots of different overlaps, lots of cities in the area. And then maintaining consistency with the existing policy direction in the comp plan and the Oregon statewide planning goals. So in terms of that approach, there are broad policies in the comprehensive plan that are meant to apply citywide on the different topics such as land use, economic development, the environment, things like that, and then areas of special concern. So this map shows where those current areas of special concern that are identified are. And so these are areas inside the city or near the city where there's maybe different design guidelines that apply or different policies about future development that are very specific to that area. We, in preparing these recommended or draft recommended policies, felt like this was a good way to address this very unique situation of the airport being outside of the city limits, but related to the city. And although some of these are areas where the city was potentially looking to, incorporate these into Wilsonville someday. That isn't necessarily a requirement for being one of these areas of special concern. So this is very preliminary, but to kind of give an idea, would be there's areas of special concern A through N, so this would be area O in purple there, and so it would basically, in looking at boundaries, we looked at the Willamette River, so making sure that Charbonneau is included within the area itself. I-5 freeway, the very squiggly line you see there is the Pudding River. That was a little bit harder to kind of figure out a eastern boundary. Barlow Road may be another option, but wanting to make sure that we got the French Prairie as well as, or the eastern portion of French Prairie rather than just the airport itself. And so this is just to kind of give an idea of where that boundary may apply. And then in your packet, you have a few pages of draft objectives. So in an area of special concern, there's usually a short narrative about the area itself, why it was designated that way, what's kind of the overview of Wilsonville's relationship with that area and plans for the future. But then there's objectives. This is a longer list of objectives than you would typically see in an area of special concern. Some of them are longer than others, but we wanted to kind of get a lot of different ideas out there and, see what the best ones were for adopting. And so this kind of summarizes those, but looking at identifying an airport influence area within the city and elsewhere in that area. So the area itself looks at kind of this broader French Prairie, but saying, is there an area that's specifically impacted by, flight operations, for instance? Formally consulting and participating in the airport master planning process. So this is already going on, but this would, lend a little bit more of a policy backing to that and making sure that the city is involved in those. And then advocating to maintain and protect. So there's two types of land that are sort of protecting agriculture and more rural uses in this area. And the Metro has designated rural reserves. There's the rural reserve around French Prairie and to the south of Charbonneau is called Area 4J when they made that map, and it kind of sets that aside from being an area where the urban growth boundary can expand for many decades. And there was a large planning process behind that. And in Clackamas County, they have exclusive farm use zoned land. It's not a rural reserve necessarily, but serves some of that same function of having that high-value agricultural land that is preserved in that way. For public facilities and services, a few of the things we looked at there are having the city advocate for connecting the airport to municipal services, but not from Wilsonville. I know there's been some concern when we talked to the Planning Commission earlier and from different folks that we've talked to in this process about Wilsonville extending utilities or services out to the Aurora Airport. Probably not likely. It's a long ways away, but, just to be clear, it wouldn't be Wilsonville, but it would be a way to address some of the existing problems with wastewater and stormwater disposal in that area of the airport. And it's a source of drinking water for the city, and so there is a pretty clear interest in making sure that that's being taken care of, even though it's outside of the city's boundaries. And then supporting the role of the airport as a hub in emergency management plans. Definitely something we heard in the survey and talking to folks is that's definitely a positive provided. For environmental resources and community design, coordinating with airport-related organizations and the public agencies that are involved to reduce the impacts of aviation. That could be through different flight paths or working with groups at the airport to try to reduce those impacts, supporting enforcement of noise standards, supporting what's called a Part 150 study that the FAA has a framework for, that is how the noise exposure maps are developed. Sometimes this is for larger airports, but also airports in that general aviation category that are close to a city. And then encouraging the airport to adopt a wildlife hazard management plan with the Pacific Flyway and Willamette River nearby. And then economic development objectives, really recognizing that you have agriculture on the French Prairie. That's a world-class farming area. You have a great transportation hub provided by the airport. And then you have Wilsonville that can provide goods and services. As a city, it can have this commercial and industrial development that provides that support and helps businesses in Wilsonville. And then similarly, making sure that transportation access across that area O, the French Prairie, remains an easy place to get through for farm to market, for firms in Wilsonville that need to use the airport, for people that just need to cross that area, to make sure that it's it kind of coincides with the agricultural protection in a way that this is an area that isn't going to become impossible to get through, because then the benefits to those three different sectors are sort of lost. So for next steps, we're in the closing stages of public outreach that Miranda mentioned, and starting to develop those draft policies that you've kind of gotten a preview of. We'll be going to City Council for a work session on May 2nd, so I'm very interested in hearing your feedback so that we can bring that to City Council, because I know they'll be interested in your feedback as well. And then as we refine the draft policies, then there'll be hearings with the Planning Commission that would then look at these in a little more specific detail. So Miranda had a few questions in her memo on this, and I have them up here. So these are questions that may help kind of guide the feedback, but feel free to address anything you'd like to. But yeah, do these reflect that community input? Is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? Are they missing the mark? Is there something missing that you would like to see? We would like to know. I will open it up for questions.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and I'll just kick off the order. Commissioner Mesbah, you want to start us off with any questions and answering any of these questions that you would like?
You had to pick on me, huh?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you normally get to go last, so I figured I'd start throwing you under the bus first.
It's kind of you. No, well, I read through the comments, and it was interesting to see the number of repeated comments that this is none of the city's business. And I don't know if that was one person repeatedly scoring online comment, or it was just cut and paste, that it got sometimes proponents of a certain point of view spread it that way to others who may share that, and they just cut and paste and post. I was happy to see that the introduction of the presentation reiterated, as well as Miranda's kind of introduction, reiterated why this is the city's business. And in whatever we produce, I would like to see a brief but comprehensive presentation of why is it that this is very much the city's business. And in a very clear way, not just opinion, so that it kind of disabuses people that this is just the city picking on the airport. It's not, and as we have in the past mentioned, and some of these policies reiterate, there is definitely a room for collaborative work with the airport that benefits both parties. But that requires taking care of the issues that can also unintentionally or intentionally pop up if we don't plan ahead.
That's right.
So I'm, wanting to make sure that the city's point of view is clearly stated, and then also this business that this benefits the city as well as potentially benefits the area surrounding the airport with agricultural and preservation goals, and how that can be boosted and protected, and all of that needs to be graphically, hopefully, in the presentation shown so that it's easy enough to decipher. I think it's easy, as a planner, we just focus on writing prose that explain the reasoning and so forth, and it turns out to be a dense document that most people don't read through. We need infographics that, in a quick review, tells people why this is important, what is important to protect, how collaboration can happen, and all of that. And that can be a summary brochure. And then the dense kind of detailed analysis can be in a plan for those who want to do a deeper dive. I don't want these to get lost in a big, thick report of gray text.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gallagher, looks like you've got something. Go ahead.
No, I want to jump in on what was just said, because I think it really gets to the heart of the matter from my perspective, and that is that in so many instances like this, a project goes ahead and the public doesn't take the time to really get involved until they're unhappy with something that's happened. So it's reactive rather than participative. And it just seems to me that if we would be able to present to the public what ifs, what if there's an accident? What if the traffic gets really bad? What if all the things that could go wrong and impact the residents of Wilsonville if we weren't trying to plan ahead? I don't know if that I'm making myself clear, but I think in so many cases, and I'm thinking back to experiences myself in earlier years of living near an airport, people didn't get up in arms and get upset about the fact that there was even an airport there until there was an accident. And then they were all just, this is terrible. And, well, where were you when we were planning? Where were you when we were trying to figure out traffic patterns? So this is a time for the residents to really understand that we're trying to circumvent those problems now by planning ahead. That's all. That's really the point I wanted to make.
Commissioner Tuzinski.
I agree with what's been said so far. I think just for me, really focusing on what all of these responses have been is the noise and the potential pollution. I would like to see that Part 150 noise study happen. And I'd also be interested, I don't know if we can do this or not, but some kind of environmental impact for air quality. I don't know if that's a possibility, but maybe that's something we can add to that.
If you're speaking, Commissioner Woods, we don't hear you.
We still can't hear you, Aaron.
I got it. I'm normally here. I said I couldn't find my mute button here. I agree with everything that's been said also, but you know, there was a lot of good input that was given by the residents of Charbonneau, and I think we have to realize that we're dealing with emotion here and actuality, at least from what I read, with the noise and concern with property values, etc. And that somewhat takes the precedence over what Amanda had said in the beginning, and also with the city. You know, some of the comments were that residents felt that the city was not really looking at this from the needs of the residents. Although I do have to say that there were a couple of comments that were on the positive side from the standpoint of emergency use and having that airport be there for that reason. So with the varied comments, and as we said earlier, a lot of them had to do with, of course, the noise and the issue, and some of us have experienced that as well. But I think, you know, from my perspective, it's important to put in the forefront, one, why the city is weighing in on this, and it is our business, as is what has been said, at least for us weighing in on that, and helping the residents clearly understand why the city is weighing in on this and what they're doing to try to help with a solution going forward. So it's not an easy task, as we all know, but I think from our perspective as commissioners, planning commissioners, and us looking at this, the issues, and looking at, of course, the comments that have been made and all of the work that has been done, we have the job of making the recommendations of what we feel is comprehensive. Now, if we look at these 4 questions here, do we feel that the plan or the policies reflect the community input? Well, unequivocally, it reflects their input, because I think with all of the comments and the open-ended comments that we have a broad spectrum of input from the community. Are the policies consistent with the direction in the comprehensive plan? They seem to be, from what I have seen, but I may be missing some things here, but I think that they are. Do the draft policies miss the mark in some way? You know, I tossed that one around, miss the mark. And I guess I need a little bit more explanation for me on when we say I'm missing the mark exactly. And then also on the key policy objectives, are there any, I should say, that are missing? And, you know, with such an in-depth topic and all of the specifics that go into this, I would imagine there probably are a few things, but from what I can see, these key policy objectives are there. So that's my input.
Commissioner Willer?
I really liked Commissioner Mesma's remarks about emphasizing why it matters and why we're doing this. I think that's a really good suggestion. And I liked Commissioner Gallagher's input on the proactive nature of this, the what-if nature. But I think we would also need to make sure that we voice the opposing side, or the pro-airport side, if you will, in terms of what if the airport wasn't there? What if the airport wasn't allowed to expand? What if it did cease to operate? Yeah, because those are equally damaging to the community and to our surrounding area. So if we're going to go that route, let's make sure that both sides are voiced.
Commissioner Carr?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yep. Very good. I think kind of to address the first one, does the draft comprehensive plan reflect the community input? I do agree with that. I think the what has been put forth in these draft policies does seem to fit. One area that I thought was a little weak was in the surface transportation. I kind of ticked off 5 areas that the survey seemed to do, and that was the noise and pollution. Surface transportation seemed to be the second biggest one, around congestion, traffic, highway and local roads. Third one was fire safety and emergency management. Fourth was the environmental, the pollution and encroachment. And then the 5th one was kind of the urban growth boundary connection. And I thought, as I looked through the policies, I was ticking off one or multiples of those 5 in how the policies were added. And it did seem like there wasn't a whole lot around the surface transportation. I kind of identified the very last one, which was in the economic development objectives. And that said, support the Aurora State Airport as an air transportation resource for Wilsonville-based firms by preserving direct, efficient access across Area O between Wilsonville and the airport. And that didn't really seem to do anything with congestion, didn't seem to do anything about the highway. So I thought that there may be some policy additions that we could make that would strengthen that one. I also kind of had a question. I know that Clackamas County has policies that are specifically addressing the airport. Are these policies kind of in concert with that? Do they not contradict, I guess? Are they in concert, and do they not contradict what Clackamas County has?
They don't contradict them. There isn't as much in the Clackamas County Comprehensive Plan that directly addresses this airport because it's outside of Clackamas County, but some of their policies deal with airport siting. There is a policy about coordinating with City of Wilsonville, Oregon Department of Aviation, et cetera, on the planning process for Aurora State Airport. So it definitely emphasizes that importance of that collaborative process, but it's not as specific about what to do about it.
Okay, so our policies would be far more specific in how the interaction goes. Okay.
Yes.
That's good. And then we talked about the rural reserve being the 4J and the French Prairie, but in Area O, what is most of it zoned for? Is it farmland?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. And so do we have strong enough policies to protect the surrounding farmland? I mean, we talk about, the positive management, but there's nothing in here. It's support mutual benefit relationship between agricultural use and French Prairie aviation. That's kind of talking about how it will help the farmland, but what are we doing to protect the farmland? I thought we might be a little weak on that one as well. And that I think gets maybe more into the land use and how we protect the farmland. So I think making sure that we've got something in there that the farmland is protected in addition to the rural reserves, and then something a little stronger about the covering the surface transportation aspect.
Okay.
That's my input. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Carr. Okay, so I've got a few maybe more technical questions around the draft policies, and then some more general comments. I think overall the draft policies reflect the majority of the community input. The one thing that I would say that as Commissioner Mesbach, gosh, I'm so used to saying Chair Mesbah, that Commissioner Mesbah, talked about was, there was a large amount of feedback from people that were related to the airport. And that feedback, I don't think, was really well shown in here. That being said, there was a lot of feedback from airport-related interests, and I would be interested to understand what percentage of the Wilsonville population actually has a direct connection to the airport. Because, and I've seen this, many times in the past with other areas of concern, you tend to get the population that has the most at risk, and so you get a lot of comments from them that may be a larger overall percentage than their actual population. So that would be something that would be interesting for me to see, to be able to make sure that we are really aligned, because if in reality 25% of the city was somehow oriented to the airport, then I don't think that we have our policies, our draft policies, aligned with the citizen input. So that's an area of interest for me as we go forward.
Okay. Excuse me, Commissioner, this is Brad Kilby here. Could you expand on that a little bit? Like, what do you think, how would you go about gathering that data, or what would you like to see as far as that goes? To your point, you're exactly correct. Most of the people that are going to respond to this are the people that may or may not be negatively affected by it. It would be interesting because, in our stakeholder outreach, we tried to get to some of the larger, employers in the area that might benefit from the airport. We did find in our process that the majority of the people at the airport today, and those businesses that are at the airport today, are the ones that benefit, of course, most from the airport.
Yeah, Brad, great question. I'm not entirely sure how we would best try to figure out that impact. I don't know if there's been any information that we've gleaned from previous surveys that we've done around employment or anything else that might paint a picture of what that might be. It would just be interesting because it feels like at 25% it is higher than what I would expect to be real. But really what I'm not sure is how high is it? How inflated is it? Because if it's only 20%, well, boy, I think that we have some different policies that we may want, or a different view that we would want to look at this at.
Yeah, great observation. It's a very small sample. I mean, even though we're glad that 100 people took the survey, that's a fairly small sample for a community as large as Wilsonville.
Yeah, agreed. Let's see. Another question around in Area O. So I appreciate the challenge in how you actually develop this area of concern. And when I looked at the map of the existing area of concerns, what I wasn't sure is whether it makes the other areas of concern we have within Wilsonville are fairly small. And so when we generate this map with this new area of concern added to it, it is going to look significant. It is significantly larger than any other area of concern, and is probably bigger than all of the other areas of concern combined. Does that make sense for the city? That's a question that I had when I looked at this. Is that really the right thing? If the airport is what we're concerned about, is such a large area of concern really what makes sense? Because if you're looking at, okay, who's impacted by the noise, then you could say that's all of Wilsonville. And so your area of concern gets much larger. I'm halfway up Wilsonville on the east side, and I'm within that area of regular flight traffic. So I was struggling there with what really makes sense from the magnitude of the area of concern, and how you draw it any larger than just the airport and the surrounding area.
Yeah, another good observation. I think from my perspective, and Chris and I were trying to, it's hard to, identify specifically, but this area largely would encompass the conical zone, or the far part 77 conical areas that are impacted, that include exclusive farm use land. We didn't want to go into Aurora, obviously, but maybe it is just anything north of the airport towards Wilsonville, but within that same French Prairie area. One of the reasons that you would want to consider around the airport is because when we're talking about transportation, the routes to I-5, to and from I-5, the farm to market and the freight routes could, extend beyond there. And so when we're talking about impacts to transportation and farming, I think it's important to recognize where we're talking about those impacts. But your point is very well noted, and we'll take a closer look at that and discuss that with city staff.
If I may, Chair.
Is the areas that are the other areas that are those smaller ones, a lot of those are meant to be sometimes regulatory, like they'll have specific design standards for different parts of the city, and so they really have a pretty heavy impact in that area, whereas this, it's a lighter touch over that larger area. It's kind of generally policy-wise how we want to deal with those impacts, but isn't going to result in Wilsonville adopting regulatory standards for anything in that area.
If I may, Chair Heberlein, I would just chime in to add a couple notes on the areas of special concern that currently exist in the city and how we treat those. They often allow and provide specific language to describe very specific considerations for that specific area that maybe wouldn't apply everywhere. So that's one way in which we think about it that might help us think about how we draw this. Another is when this might get called to attention for staff. So if we were reviewing, say, an application or thinking about a proposal for an area, we would, if it was on this map, then we would have to look at what is stated in that area of special concern and whether or not what is being proposed there is consistent, and whether or not we might want to either place additional conditions or participate in a process to provide comment on a proposal. So if it was in the county, we would provide feedback or a proposal. If it was in the city, then we would look at that as we're reviewing an application for the site and whether or not it's addressing all of the items in the area of special concern. Or whether, for example, we used to have Frog Pond West as an area of special concern, or Coffee Creek as an area of special concern, both of which have since been dropped from the map once we adopted the zoning and all of the code elements that we have for it. And so it outlines elements that we'd want in developing those standards later down the line for the development code. So it does provide direction to us. So that's one way to just maybe think about it in helping the project team develop what the appropriate area of special concern might be.
Okay. And then as I was going through some of the specifics, so the public facilities and services, the number one jumped out at me, and I was trying to figure out exactly why it's important for Wilsonville that the airport is connected to municipal services. And then, Chris, when you were talking through it, you talked about it being in the community feedback, but I didn't see that in the community feedback. I saw one reference to, I think, sewer connections to Wilsonville, but so I was curious as to how this one floated to the top when I wasn't sure how it really directly played a role in terms of an impact to Wilsonville and Wilsonville's residents.
Yeah, so it came up in a few stakeholder interviews, and also we looked at some of the previous documents. One of the things we looked at was the Oregon Solutions report from 2 or 3 years ago, and it was mentioned as a pretty big concern in that report as well. And then the connection for Wilsonville is mostly just that it's in the watershed and it's flowing into the Willamette River, from that area. So making sure that you don't have a large-scale use or like a larger, industrial use, for instance, in the future going in there without having water and sewer and storm drainage that's working.
But is that technically even feasible to occur? Would that be allowed in Marion County regulations or Clackamas County regulations to be able to do something like that?
It depends on like if it was annexed into a city, or if there's different ways that facilities like that can get that type of service. So it would depend, but the city it would basically be a position of the city of Wilsonville just saying, we support this as it comes up.
Yeah, I think one of the other things to just add to that is that one of the issues was capacity. So there are instances in the state where if you're within a certain distance of a municipal water and sewer system, when you have, for example, a failing septic system that's not really able to handle the effluent and not really any good place to replace it. Like, do you want to really replace it on EFU's own land? Probably not. You want to connect it to urban services. And basically that policy is just that. It's just that the city's supporting the connection of the airport to urban services in the future, but not from the city of Wilsonville. To your point, because there's portions of this in Clackamas, I don't know that those portions are outside of the urban growth boundary. You couldn't extend urban services outside of the urban growth boundary, and it's probably also in your plan that you wouldn't extend urban services outside of the city limits.
Okay, let's see. And then in item 1 in the airport, item 2 in the airport compatibility objectives, 2A, it talks about improving safety for air traffic over the city. I'm a pilot. You're going to have to explain that one to me. How is that going to improve the aircraft safety? I think there's some rewording that could be done there because it doesn't make sense to me as it's written. Because when I read this, I say, oh, we're gonna put FAA registered flight patterns in, and that's going to improve safety for the aircraft over the city.
Yeah, that's good. That's good feedback. Some of these are, policies that we have found in other places near, similar sized airports. I think that one might have been city of Snohomish, Washington. And so that's a good feedback to get on this to if there's maybe we can do better.
Okay. Yeah, and then
I was going to say maybe it's not a policy, maybe it's just recognition that there are concerns raised about safety within the community, and then talk about how that is generally regulated by the FAA and not local government.
Yeah, I think that would, having a little more detail around that would be good. And then last one on that one, talks about protecting the interests of Area O residents living near the airport. And I guess this is one of the challenges that I have is that this type of thing, FAA registered flight patterns, more consistent, how are they coming in to mitigate noise from being all in one place? That's a larger than just the area of interest for Area O. That's the entire city. I mean, that's me. That's everybody in this call. So I'm not sure if there's a better way to word that to say, yeah, it's about Area O, but it's really a bigger thing than that.
Yeah, I wonder if some of the very noise-specific policies, maybe some of those do fit as larger citywide policies.
Yeah, in my opinion, it should. Yeah, I mean, in my mind, you take the center line of the airport and you do a 10-degree line in both directions, and that's going to be the area that you get most of your traffic coming in or out of the airport at, especially on straight-in traffic. So that covers most of Wilsonville.
Yeah.
And I guess the last point, and I see a couple hands up, and then I'll get to those. I think my last point around farmland and maintaining farmland, I just want to make sure that we as a city recognize that the city of Wilsonville was built on farmland. And I don't want us to take a stance of it's okay for us to do it, but it's not okay for somebody else to do it. That goes around development, concerns about traffic, concerns about farmland mitigation, concerns about pollution. We're doing all of those things within Wilsonville, so we should make sure that we aren't trying to force somebody else to do something different than we are. All right, I'm not sure whose hand was up first, but I'll go with Commissioner Carr first.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on this map, this eastern edge. I know it's jagged, probably because of, is it the actual river? Or is it
river? Yeah. So
well, rivers do change. So do you just want to just make it a straight line, that goes from point to point? Making it jagged for something that could potentially change over time, I don't expect to live more than 50 more years, so it may not have an impact, but rivers do kind of meander and change directions a bit.
It is actually the county line.
That is the county line?
But it's in that direction, I would say, is probably like that eastern boundary of any of these. We wanted to put a large area out, and I think it's easier to kind of narrow it if there's more specific feedback. But that was the line that seemed to follow the general area that I was looking at. But
we obviously didn't follow Indiana's guidelines for making counties. So yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think there's other opportunities with different roads and property boundaries to have a straight line through there.
Thank you.
All right, and Commissioner Mesbah, we'll go ahead and go to you, and we're getting a push for a reminder on time, so we're running short. So, what do you have?
Area O to me, and I didn't hear a lot of discussion about it, is the area of potential future growth if things aren't planned properly. There was some discussion that this wouldn't be allowed because it's outside of the urban growth boundary and all the rest of that. All of those are just political decisions. Under a different political scenario, when there is pressure or competition for annexing this area between Aurora and Wilsonville, Wilsonville will have it in its interest to annex it and develop it, because Wilsonville is already extended on the south side of the river here, and any growth or any extension of services will be extensive, and the larger contribution from development, future development that you can have, the lower that cost will be to the community. So the area as shown, to me, is a logical area of being in danger of future urban development. And by future, I mean long future. This airport is here forever for what we know. And so 50 years down the line, this could very easily be intense urban development. with all the stuff that can be adjacent to a airport and commercial and industrial development. And that needs to be part of our long-range plan because we either need to make sure that every step we take is thinking about whether or not we are without really meaning moving in that direction willy-nilly, or that we are doing it strategically and in a way that makes sense in the long range. And with that in mind, the river is a logical boundary, although I would have given it a urban green space kind of buffer because we know putting river floods every year, and so there's going to be a lot of floodplain that is not developable in that area. So, but it's a fine boundary.
Okay, thank you. I think we've given plenty of feedback. Is there anything else that you're looking for tonight?
This is really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. That was great feedback.
All right. Back to my agenda. So, Rachel, looks like Frog Pond East and South Master Plan with Mr. Polly is up next.
Yes, and I will go ahead and introduce that real quickly. All of you are very well aware of the project. We are working on master planning the next great neighborhoods for the city of Wilsonville and planning for additional residential growth, which is greatly needed. As you know, we're looking back at the area plan and when it was adopted and the policies put in place there. We're also incorporating new policy direction that has occurred in the last few years, both at the city with the Equitable Housing Strategic Plan and at the state level with House Bill 2001, and also with world changes. So one of the things we'll be talking about tonight is the neighborhood commercial area, and as we know, retail and commercial is changing. You've had several work sessions on the Frog Pond Master Plan already. The project continues to make great progress and is still on schedule, thankfully. Great job, Mr. Polly and team. Tonight is an exciting work session. I was reviewing the material and the presentation, and we're going to have a presentation on overall neighborhood design concepts and how that relates to the existing development out there and the new neighborhood commercial area. And you can really start to see how these neighborhoods might build out over time and options for that. So I'm excited to hear your discussion tonight. And with that, I will pass it to Mr. Polly, Planning Manager with the City of Wilsonville, to introduce the team who's here to discuss this with you tonight.
Thank you, Miranda, and I hope you all enjoyed your airport appetizers, so we can now move on to the Frog Pond main course and dessert. So with me tonight is some folks you guys, this group has met before. So we have Joe Dills and Andrew Parrish with APG, now part of MIG, as well as Sam Brookham and Chris Zahas with Leland Consulting. So welcome them, and they'll participate at various points as we go through the presentation, as well as be available for your questions. So we'll get into it. So as Miranda mentioned, what's on the menu tonight then is talking more, continuing our conversation from our February work session, and gratefully Sam and I both feel much better from that work session. And get really some decisions and direction moving forward for that. Then we get into recommended design concepts. Really, this is to talk about what are going to be some of the important inputs as we come up with alternatives for the land use and urban design of the master plan. And then we'll provide some other brief project updates, just real quick, about upcoming outreach and what's in store over the coming weeks. So for starting out, we will spend the first good chunk of our work session on neighborhood commercial. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Joe, Sam, and Chris.
Okay, I'll take it from here. Hey everybody, Sam with Leland Consulting Group. I won't mention this too much. We talked about it in a couple of previous meetings. This is the 2015 area plan that looked at some of the commercial development, looking at the corner of Stafford and Advance Beckman Road. And that plan really laid out support for about 3.5 acres. And so this project our role is really to take a refresh look at some of the opportunities. And so we'll look at the overall program and the location as well. So next. If you've had a chance to review any of our materials thus far, or maybe this is the first time you're seeing them, we selected a handful of case studies, including 3 convenience centers, one with a pharmacy anchor, 2 grocery-anchored neighborhood centers, and a Main Street commercial type development, and that is Northwest Crossing. So you'll see that generally across these case studies, the percent of non-retail development, which is important, I promise, generally ranges from 15 to 30%. The exception is really the Village and Shop Shoals there, and that's largely because of second-story offices. We also looked to contextualize how some of the housing units, the jobs, and the traffic counts projected in 2035, which is our planning horizon for Brock Pond, how those would really stack up against all of the built projects that you see here. And so most of them are equal to or higher than what you would see in Brock Pond. I do want to draw your attention to Northwest Crossing, where I will highlight in a second in a little bit more detail quickly, but they're roughly equal. They're roughly similar to what we might see in Frog Pond, and that development program is 6 acres and 84,000 square feet. Granted, it's taken a long time to develop, and most in the last year, there's a brand new 2-acre site that's been developed for 30,000 square feet, building including a food hall. If you go to the next slide, case study is really just I wanted to highlight that because it's come up a couple of times in our discussions. A couple of things to note is that it was built by a master developer, which allowed them to take on a little bit more risk with the commercial element. And again, it has taken a very long time to develop, and it's ongoing, of course. There's still vacant land in that site, but it's a good case study to profile, and we've profiled it in more detail in our memo. So if you go to the next slide. The other piece to mention on Northwest Crossing is that there is an important placemaking element as well. There's a direct connection to the park, to the East Compass Park there, and there's a lot of nearby employment development as well. And it's on the western edge of Bend. Again, Bend's different market a little bit, but a lot of similarities and good takeaways for Frog Pond that I'll revisit in a second. Go to the next slide. I'll dig into some of our analysis for Frog Pond. So here we're showing the trade area, and really what we're talking about with the trade area is the area from which we expect most of Frog Pond's future customers for the commercial center to originate. So the trade area is impacted by nearby competition like Argyle Square and the Wilsonville Town Center and any other retail development that would develop out in that vicinity. It's also impacted by access and connectivity, etc. when we think about neighborhood serving retail, which is something that the 2015 area plan identified as the core opportunity, as well as what we have re-identified or confirmed as a core opportunity, it typically has a smaller trade area than some of the developments like Argyle Square and the town center. So it's probably going to be within that 1 mile radius, but it may also include undeveloped land to the north that will develop into the future in some of those other UTP areas. So just something that's important to factor in as we think about commercial demand, which I'll speak to on the next slide. This is just all the metrics that we looked at, or we do look at, and we looked at when we were identifying the level of likely demand and the market potential for the site. So there's spending leakage, which really just means there's spending going on outside that trade area, which from households within that trade area, which is obvious because there's no retail currently. The existing and the future customer base and the purchasing power of that base. We've spoken to a number of developers that I'll speak to in a second about what they think of the market. But generally, Wilsonville is viewed as an attractive market with high incomes and good demographics. And it's a commute route. The purchasing power is solid. So, there's nothing there to be concerned about in terms of challenges for future retail. And then in terms of the existing to the future base, 4,000 future households projected by our planning horizon of 2035. So all of that went into what you'll see on the next slide, which is a lot of data and a lot of numbers. There's a lot that goes into demand forecast for retail, which is what we're showing here. So moving left to right real fast, I'm not going to dig into all of this, but basically growth. The growth in demand for new retail is largely due to household growth. And there will be some level of recapture of existing spending leakage. So, new development is going to attract some of those, some of the households in the area back to the area to spend their money there instead. But, then we're only going to be able to capture differing portions of total retail demand in each category for new built commercial space in Frog Pond. Go to the next slide. Really what we're looking at is that bottom right piece. So of total retail demand, which is something in the 251,000 square foot range, we're only likely going to capture about 10 or 12 to 22% of that total demand. And that's pretty consistent for neighborhoods serving retail, such as this. So that translates to about 31,000 to 56,000 square feet of commercial development, which at an industry standard FAR, floor area ratio of 0.25, that would translate to about 3 to 5 acres land. So going forwards, the next slide, I mentioned we talked to several prominent commercial developers, and really our MO there was to get their take on the opportunities to Frog Pond, barriers to development, and to confirm some of the analysis that we had done already. So some of their feedback is shown here. They talked about the challenges of new development in a market like Wilsonville that's generally well served by retail already. They also talked about the need for about double the amount of drive-by traffic that is projected by 2035 on Stafford Road. So that's a core challenge that is not necessarily going to get rectified. That's just what it is. The importance of developing higher density residential near commercial development, and some of that is to mitigate some of the challenges of the lack of drive-by visibility and traffic. So, you're increasing the customer base that's able to support that local commercial development. They also talk about the challenges of attracting a grocery store, but there is a potential to attract a pharmacy anchor, which is pretty important to the viability and success of future commercial center. And then Similarly, the importance of encouraging non-retail tenants, like if you recall the case study showed 15 to 30% of non-retail tenants typically. That could be higher if you and increase the square footage of that commercial area. If you start including things like dental offices, salons, fitness centers, banks, etc. And then I think most importantly out of all this, that they recommended a site program of about 4 acres under those 2035 conditions, which is right in the middle of what our commercial forecasts really showed. But that a larger program or quote, riskier development site might be more likely under a master developer, or if there was going to be a little bit more of a waiting period until some additional land to the north developed out. So a couple of considerations there. And so going forwards, looking at the location, that was another key component here. And the recommended location is really at the future extension of Brisbane, or the new street, Brisbane Road. And that's largely because it balances everything mentioned thus far. It maximizes the visibility. You have max visibility from Stafford, but you also have expected drive through and drive-by traffic coming from those neighborhoods east of Stafford, which you wouldn't necessarily have on the corner of Advance and Stafford Road. You're much more centralized to those future households. You also have the opportunity for Main Street retail on both sides of the street, which could be pretty instrumental in the viability of future retail. Creating that more experience-based retail environment. And for that, though, that design standards, the building orientation and parking is critical to success. And I know that's a little bit more in the weeds for what the goal or the purpose of this analysis and plan is, but just something to consider going forward. I also mentioned previously about the pharmacy anchor. This allows for, this and the corner location further south, but this also allows for a corner anchor like pharmacy that will increase the viability of a commercial center. So the next slide I'm showing is just a lot of what I've talked about already, but it is a summary of that development program. There's a lot of words here, but a couple of things to highlight is that 4-acre site acreage that is likely to accommodate about 44,000 square foot of generally unanchored space, but potentially with a pharmacy or some other, maybe it's a specialty food store that is not a full service grocery store. Development type of Main Street retail at 0.25 to 0.3, which would be indicative of slightly higher density land use type that would come with Main Street retail typically. Parking at 4 to 5 spaces per 1,000. I think 4 is pretty standard, and with smaller programs, smaller commercial center programs, it's likely to require a slightly more flexible parking configuration, just because you don't necessarily have that flexibility or that spillover. If, for example, you had the next best thing in Wilsonville that attracted the whole city. And so, and I won't go into the next two, but that's pretty much the conclusion of our work. I'm happy to go into anything further. I know we've got some questions to pause on in the next slide. I wanted to move through that quickly so we could get to this discussion, but I'm happy to go into anything in more detail. Thanks.
Thank you very much for this portion of the presentation. All right, Commissioner Carr, why don't you start us off this time?
Great, thank you. you. So I do like the idea of it being moved to that kind of Brisbane Road, because I like the idea of the Main Street look. I think that will blend from Stafford Road into a residential area more smoothly if it's got kind of that Main Street look and feel. I do also like the idea of the kind of the high density surrounding the commercial. I think we looked at that, talked about that last time, where we, put the higher density right around the commercial and then let it spawn out from there. That I think also kind of fits that the Bend one. I think that's what they did as well. Is they had kind of apartments nearby that. I did see a pretty comprehensive look at it. I think I do have questions kind of around I know we're also looking at doing kind of a town center rework, and the timing of that is going to be sooner, I would assume, than this. And I'm wondering what the change of that town center rework is going to do as far as meeting the needs of a larger population set in Wilsonville, and what would that do potentially to any commercial development in the Frog Pond area? Because again, if you make the town center area larger, let's say 2x, right, you've now got a much larger impact to Frog Pond. And I looked at that and actually asked my wife a question, because we are in the target area, but it's not, as the roads stand now, it's not a convenient, it wouldn't be convenient for us to get to that. And I said, if there was a commercial area here in Frog Pond and there's still this commercial area in Town Center, where would she drive? And she said, oh, Town Center for sure. So it kind of gave me a pause of are we including more houses in our analysis, more residents, more spending dollars in our analysis? And what does that do if we look at physical road barriers to the potential? What does that do from from the total acreage and square footage needed to fulfill that? With also the understanding that the urban growth boundary could extend to north of what is Frog Pond, and obviously we're looking at 2035 and beyond, right? And when would we build this? When, build it and they will come. I'm not sure if that's really going to fit well in a commercial node. I think the people have to be there in order to build the commercial node. So again, what would be the timing of when that's built? But yeah, I thought the analysis was really good. I'm just concerned about what the town center rework would do. But other than that, I like the recommendations.
Sam, do you have any insight into what the set of assumptions was in terms of the level of town center development in the analysis?
Yeah, there's a couple of things there I can speak to. And first is kind of looking at that trade area. There's a reason the trade area doesn't include the Wilsonville town center. It is neighborhood serving. I know there would be a lot of crossover and a lot of not necessarily cannibalization, because we are only assuming that 12 to 22% of all demand created by those 4,000 households within that, let's say, 1 mile trade area, will be will make up the majority of the customer base for front ponds. So there's a conservative level to that that I think will not be impacted by the Wilsonville Town Center in such a way that it will greatly impact what is feasible in front pond. I mean, the other piece is you look at a program, and we're recommending a 4-acre program. I think you look at the high and the low, or you can say a conservative or an aggressive scenario, which is that 3 to 5 acre. There's not a lot of difference there. It doesn't take a lot of households to necessarily support 30,000 square feet of retail. Whether or not there is a developer willing to take on that 30,000 square foot program is another question. But again, we're thinking 13, 14 years down the line. And I think the only change would be the timing. It may be 2035, it may be 2040. There are lots and lots of examples out there of commercial land being designated and sitting vacant for many, many years. I mean, Northwest Crossing is considered a very successful case study now, but it's still developing decades on from that residential program being built. So I think that it just comes back to that flexibility. And again, I mean, if you have a master developer that's interested, I keep coming back to that. That's a little bit of a unique situation, but it does mitigate some of that risk. You can also mitigate some of the risk on the city side, literally just by planning for much more density surrounding it, as you mentioned. So you create that customer base. I talked to a number of developers that said we'd much rather have a ton of walk-to traffic, because you're capturing a greater percentage of their spending than drive-by traffic. So there's a lot of considerations there, but I think that the long and short of it is there is flexibility in this program that we're recommending, and I don't think there's going to be a huge impact from Wilsonville Town Center. I don't know if Chris has anything to add to that.
Thanks, Sam. Commissioner Willard.
Yeah, so as you described, the size and the tenant mix, the location, all that feels very natural. It feels very organic to me based on some of the more modern developments that I've seen. So I think that's a great location, and the tenant mix is fine. If anything, I'd want to err on the side of smaller versus larger, just because of what we were just talking about in terms of the difficulties to fill some of these spaces. It takes years often to fully develop them. And I feel like with the pandemic, the real estate, the commercial real estate market is changing, and it's very dynamic. And so I don't know that our crystal balls are going to help us much. And so I think opting for more housing and less commercial might be the right balance if we had to choose one. And because of all that, I think a partnership and a master developer cohort to go along with us would be a very important implementation step, or a very, maybe not important, but it would be ideal if we had that, because their crystal ball would probably be sharper than some of ours as they're closer to it. And as far as development standards, parking, residential, I don't have a lot of thoughts on that one at this juncture.
Mr. Woods.
Yeah, looking at this plan here, first of all, I think you've done a really good job of giving us, some visibility and look. And, because I live close to this area here in Wilsonville Meadows and walk out to the area that we're talking about in Frog Pond West, and knowing that corner specifically, and then now, with this new road that will be going through there, I think about not only that, when the development is built out, and then Frog Pond South, and then the potential of future development, which is sometime down the road. And, what has already been said is in reference to town center being developed. I believe that the opportunity in this area, I think it's a good opportunity. And here's a couple of the reasons, and I'll tell you the main one I like. When we look at the development here and the types of housing that we'll have in apartments, and we discussed this before about walkability, I believe having something in this area here, it's close to Frog Pond West, East will be there, and South, and existing developments that are close to that. You got Arbor Trail, you got Wilsonville, Meadows, I forget the other one that's right across the street that's just right in the area south of this, off of Wilsonville Road. The number of people that would be able to walk to this, I think it's pretty high. And so having said that, initially when I looked at this, my thoughts were, of course, I shouldn't say of course, but the corner, of Advance and Stafford there, that intersection I thought was pretty good. Then when I looked at your chart here, and I thought also, okay, most developer-friendly option, that's good. Likely, to develop the quickest. But then when I looked at the Brisbane Road one, it's the most balanced option according to what you have here, and it appears that that is correct, market-driven versus experience. But the other thing is that the traffic piece here, which I think, is important once the Frog Pond residential area is complete. So that is the one, the Brisbane Road one that I like. It seems to have the most parking, as will be potentially needed. But also, the more I think about this, the walkability, maybe the community type of center for meeting in that part of Wilsonville, which will be a totally new area. Even though, there's some challenges potentially with, the configuration of the parking, even the potential need of subsidies for more development. And then I guess the other one, a little bit more in the long-term potential of developing this mixed-use program. But overall, I think for me, I like the Brisbane Road one, and I, for one, feel that it's not a building and they will come. I think that when it's built and when the homes, the apartments, and the walkability, I think that's going to be a key piece because people are going to want to have something in their area. It's a little bit far for them to get to town center without a car. But having this in that space will give them the opportunity to feel like they have something of their own. So I like that, the Brisbane Road one, as I said here a minute ago, and I think the pieces that are connected with this, I think in time with the developers, and I think that they'll work themselves out. I really do. So that's my input.
Commissioner Tazinski.
Yeah, I do actually like the idea of the little main street off of Brisbane instead of the initial kind of corner that we were thinking of. I want to echo what Commissioner Willard said and err on the side of a little bit smaller in this. For me, when we first started talking about putting the commercial center in there, it was more convenience-based and less destinational. You know, like a coffee shop or a small market or a pharmacy, something that you can walk to or that maybe you need on your in or out of the neighborhood. Less, you know, someplace that you're going to go do your big shop or something like that. So yeah, having the main street feels a lot more organic, feels a lot more like a neighborhood, like somewhere you'd want to live, as opposed to right next to a big shopping center. Especially if we're going to have the more higher density in there. To me, that's the kind of place that if I'm choosing between this townhouse or apartment, I'd want to pick something that has a nice little neighborhood I can walk to, as opposed to, you know, across town where there's nothing. So yeah, I like the direction this is going in. I think partnering with a master developer would help a lot, but that's all I have to say now.
Commissioner Gallagher.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on what was just said. I like the Brisbane idea too, and I think the thing that I haven't heard articulated, but I want to just make sure that we don't lose track of the fact that what we're really talking about is what kind of quality of life are we planning here? Are we planning a suburban community where you get in your car no matter what you need, whether it's a bottle of milk or, you know, a prescription, or are we creating a neighborhood to make it easy for people to converge and enjoy the neighborhood that they're living in? And I think that's a quality of life issue I just don't want us to lose track of.
Commissioner Misbah.
I will use Commissioner Gallagher's statement as a segue. I never liked the corner idea because that, to me, was going to be at a shopping center at the corner, which, as the analysis is indicating, is likely going to not age well. The Brisbane idea is a good one. One of the things, and the analysis, I really appreciate the thoroughness of the analysis here and the comparables and all the comparisons. One of the things that I was feeling missing was in all of these commercial areas, we look at the commercial activity. We think about stores and square footage and all of that. We seem not to be designing urban activity centers as part of our these town centers. The commercial center in Villebois has that square in front of it, which has, you know, some activity going on. They have in good weather, a coffee cart and stuff like that. And not too far from it, the green space in Villebois is adjacent to that as well. Green space and parks, I feel, are segregated too much from our commercial centers. If we are looking at a quality of life and as a gathering space,
exactly,
we need to combine these with one another. In fact, in certain cities, Atlanta comes to mind, they're using their green space planning as economic development vehicle because it is creating a green space around which there are job opportunities and business opportunities. So if we are creating a high density neighborhood center here, it would make sense for some green space to be coupled with it so that you don't only have a commercial center, but a gathering place, a hanging out place. If we were in Italy, it would be a piazza. Mm-hmm. We have seen how those things work. It becomes a space where people want to hang out, and the commercial around it then prospers as well.
Right.
So I don't know what it takes to have some of the park and open space area coupled with this new neighborhood center that we're talking about at the end of Brisbane Street, and whether or not it's doable. In the neighborhood plan, the regional park or the neighborhood park is way south of Advance Road, not really near this area. Nor does this area have a natural connection to the Grange, which is not too far from it. I think these things can be coupled with one another in a way to create a much more creative and critical mass of activity to benefit the commercial activities and areas, as well as create gathering places and improved kind of quality of life spaces.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Mesbah. Yeah, I don't think I have a whole lot to add. I definitely agree with the concept of maybe aiming small in terms of the amount of space. It seems like a safer bet than aiming big or even at the middle at this point. But I do really like the concept that Commissioner Mesbah identified and the potential for tying it together and making it more of a place to go. It's an intriguing idea. I'm not sure how we effectively do it in the area, especially with such a busy road, bisecting the area. How do you make it a place where both sides are safe and able to go there? So it's an interesting idea in that sense. The one thing that I thought I liked the Brisbane idea in terms of the location. I was surprised that it wasn't a recommendation at the corner because of the traffic counts and my expectation that you'd have much higher visibility at the corner. But I'm not against it in the location where it's been proposed. Yeah, Sam, looks like you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just want a quick note about that, and I think if you're on the corner, your visibility on Advanced Road east of Stafford, the ADT is pretty drop off, so the visibility isn't that much more. And in fact, I think in terms when you add in the walk shed and the potential for that walkability, and you're adding in, you're maximizing the number of cars and drive-by traffic and visibility from those new households in Frog Pond East. You actually get more visibility and more access in this Brisbane location versus the corner. So just a quick clarification on that.
Yeah, that might be something to put into the presentation for council, just so that that's emphasized. Because that, when I looked at it, it did not look intuitive to me that would be the higher, more viable area. So it might be something to think about.
I have a hand.
Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Mesbah. Sorry.
Depending on how it's designed, it would actually have much better visibility where it's located. It can be opening up to Stafford as opposed to its back to Stafford. So it could be a gateway into the neighborhood, in other words. That is a town center and commercial kind of attraction. One of the things that I was going to also mention, which I forgot, is there was this talk about a master developer would be better equipped to do this. If that's the case, we should push for it. In the report, I noticed that there was an alternative to that, and the alternative was, well, the city could do it. If we are not going to have a master developer, I think the city should do this, because otherwise, this is an opportunity that's probably not going to be realized, and it's too precious an opportunity.
I agree. Okay, are we ready to move on? I'm going to say, I think we're ready to move up. Commissioner Carr, go ahead, real quick.
I just wanted to add one that Commissioner Mesbah's comments about incorporating the kind of the park got me thinking about this 10, 12, 15 years from now, right? Is if, as you said, how about the city does this? Do we start this out as an open space, right? It's kind of a gathering area with the idea of developing it in the future, right? So that kind of got me thinking, scratching my head going, that might be a way to handle this for a 10, 12, 14, 15-year period. This is all kind of, I wouldn't say green space, but this is all open park area with the idea that it will be developed in the future at some point. And that gives us a chance to developer, if there isn't a master developer, that gives a chance for developers to build out the other areas that will be the houses and the multi-tenant instances. And then 10, 12, 14 years from now, we come back and actually build the commercial because we now have the houses to warrant a commercial space. I kind of like the idea of that combination. Is then when it becomes time to build, we potentially have more acreage, and then we do a closer study to say, now that we have the houses, what does the commercial space look like? And again, incorporating the rest of the space as open area, gathering area.
That's a great idea.
Mr. Polly, are we ready to move forward?
Sure, and I appreciate those comments. Very helpful. Took some great notes. I will comment in terms of, as you'll see in the upcoming slides, we're actually contemplating the possibility of a neighborhood park associated with this as the placemaking element. So I appreciated that comment. That is something that's in our mind. And still, it's maybe too early to really know the feasibility of this, but there's a possibility that Grange has to move anyway. So because of road improvements. So yeah, there's definitely some possibilities to explore here to make this a great place. So I appreciate the comments, and we'll move forward with that. So let's shift gears, if that's okay, to really community design concepts. And some of these will be things that we've already talked about. We're going to build on what we've talked about, the commercial and the housing, but then we're going to quick touch on a number of other concepts that will be important. So I will go ahead and talk about the first couple, and then I'll hand it over to Joe to talk through a lot of the other ones. So first of all, housing variety. This comes from, and this is really talking about all portions of the plan. We've heard previous comments from this commission about, we don't want it segregated. We don't want multifamily here, single family over here. We're talking about all portions of the plan, and with housing and oriented to streets and green spaces, integrated within the different sub-districts, which we'll talk about later, and blocks. So really looking at urban design that integrates a variety of residential uses throughout. That's an important concept. The other one is, with that integration of different uses, market rate uses, also integrating the affordable housing piece, which we've talked about over the last work sessions. One alternative that we'll be presenting to the public in the coming weeks will reflect everything in the affordable housing analysis that reflects the targets that we talked about. Others will include various types and amounts from the affordable housing analysis to really stimulate a continued community conversation and about the feasibility and the decisions that need to be made to bring forward the affordable housing that we've talked about. The next one is a form-based design and a transect. So this transect we talk about, this is, I think you've heard Miranda and I talk about a lot from Villebois even, where the village center, you have the commercial core with the highest density that kind of fans out as you get to the edges. and we've seen that in other areas. But this is really when we talk about, and this is really talking about density, but because of the mix of uses, it's more about look and feel, how, each area based on kind of the urban form will tend towards certain housing types, but at the same time, a variety of housing types will be allowed within that area. And so it's really more looking at that urban design, that look and feel, rather than numerical units per acre, which we'll need to know approximate units per acre for infrastructure planning, but really the driver rather than units per acre will be the urban design and what we're trying to accomplish there. So the initial ideas that were really reflective of the Frog Pond Area Plan is what has been talked about tonight already quite a bit, is the larger building types centered around that commercial Main Street area off of Stafford, with areas that are further out on the rural edge tending towards the smaller building types. And I know, Joe, if you have anything to add to what I've just said, as you've worked on this a lot, on this and other projects, and then I'll hand it over to you to talk through the other elements.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. I think you said it well on this particular design concept. It's about the character of the place, not how many units per acre. And we want to be thoughtful and artful in where we organize larger buildings and the public spaces around them, or medium size and smaller in the neighborhood. So let's go to the next slide. These are some initial diagrams we did to relook at opportunities and constraints, learn some new ideas, and start to draw some relationships within the neighborhoods. So we've titled this Unique Elements and Destinations. The first diagram was labeled Special Places, and it included the Grange, just a sampling of some of the best trees, really the ones that are circled there. There are other good tree areas throughout the neighborhoods. The middle circle there that's labeled Future Neighborhood Park, that is the one that Dan was referring to earlier. It's consistent with the city's park and recreation master plan to have one neighborhood scale park serving this area. And so where that is and how it relates to community gathering spaces is all the opportunities are before us. So fabulous discussion that you had earlier about trying to be very intentional about community gathering spaces. And I'll also offer that there are options for how we can organize. It may not be just one single traditional park that is square or circle, but it might be a linear shape. It might have two ends and connected by park blocks. There's all sorts of ideas that could be explored there. The future community park and the middle school jumped out at us as on this list of destinations and special places. And then it's just at the edge of the graphic, but the primary school and the high school are really not too far away either. So this was a little bit inspiring to us, and the next diagram kind of looks how we might start to put these ideas together. They naturally form some walking routes and some ways to get from one place to another. So the Brisbane Road to the future community park and Meridian Creek Middle School is the smaller of the arcing arrows. Frog Pond Lane to 60th, and ultimately connecting over to where the primary school is and the high school. So these were helpful relationships to kind of pause and ask the question, how can we connect these things, and how can we celebrate them in the actual design of these two neighborhoods? Let's go to the next slide. So we started to draw some streets, and this, of course, is building off of previous work. But one way to organize the framework streets might be the arcing arrangement that's on the left, and another way might be a little bit more rectilinear arrangement on the right. Either one needs to be mindful of a very tough dimension and space in the east neighborhood, and it's that space between the larger arcing road and the easement itself. We don't want that to be left over. We don't want it to be back fences. It needs to be as quality and part of the neighborhood as every other place. So how wide is it? How do we organize housing in it? How can a sense of permeability and visual corridors to the easement area be organized? I should point out the red lines here as the trail network in the area that would go along with these framework streets, and of course there'd be more streets. But we do have creeks and so on to deal with. We won't be building any new roads across them. So the connections that I mentioned from the south neighborhood over to the primary school and high school, of course, that will be walking and biking type of connection itself. But walking and biking routes and the walkability of this area really is one of the ways to make it special. Unfortunately, we're very constrained by the fact we've only got Beckman, we've only got Wilsonville Road that go into the rest of the city. There are wonderful neighborhoods that nestle inside each of those, but with that limitation of connections into Wilsonville, the rest of the community, this area, I think, will be sort of a standout in the sense that it has very safe and convenient and direct walking and biking routes. So anyway, we started to think a lot about connectivity. Next diagram, please. You've had a very strong conversation. We got to the same result on the mixed-use center. I'll just show you the background thinking. We looked again at the corner, thought of all of the pros and cons, mostly the cons that you did with it. But we did start to think about these nodes of activity with these diagrams. And so that's why the Grange is labeled as one. Let's go to the next diagram. We'll kind of keep talking through the idea as we look at others. We thought, well, what if the mixed-use center is up closer to the extension of Frog Pond Lane into the east neighborhood? Some constraints there as well. And then finally to this one where the team was very much reaching the same kinds of conclusions that you did in the discussion you just had. I want to extend this thinking with you to think about if the Grange is a neighborhood activity center and Brisbane Main Street is a neighborhood activity center, then what smaller ones might we have in the residential areas that are distributed to the east and to the north and down into the south neighborhood? I mean, and we've just kind of ghosted those in with the little green dots, but it's a concept that we think builds on this idea of having lots of destinations within the neighborhoods, and they're connected with this arcing set of connections that I've been talking about. Okay, let's go on to the next one. A little bit more about the easement itself. In the community conversations we've had, it's one of the things that is one of the most recurrent questions we have. What can be done? What are the opportunities for the easement? You've heard some of the list. We can't build buildings, but we can certainly have open space uses. So the possibilities are sports facilities, passive trail. You can put parking within it if you have a use that needs it. and community gardens and on and on. So it's also part of the mix is the point that I'm making in thinking about not only where do we put houses and where do we put parks and community destinations, but how does it also relate to this fairly generous easement with high power lines running through it. Go to the next slide, if we could. This is just a note on the Grange itself. Since the area plan, or beginning with the area plan, it has been thought of as a community gathering place, even if it's a small, subtle one, like a building that has the theater group in it. It can also have some environmental signage and some historical signage and a place to get off into the trails or other uses in the easement. And as was mentioned earlier, we have some more work to do on can that building really stay there with the improvements that need to be made to Stafford Road. Personally, I think we ought to press the team to see if there's a cross-section that works, that would keep the building where it is, but the option of moving it and having it reinforce a nearby new community gathering space is also kind of on our palette of choices. Okay, next slide. I think I'm getting close to the end here. We've talked about the idea of subdistricts. This diagram is just one example of how those might organize themselves. The series of thinking that I've described to you here about large relationships, special places and destinations we want to get to. Okay, then how do we draw roads? And then how do we place the center and a park and organize housing? Natural areas of subdistrict of complementary mixes of homes and building types and variety will naturally shape out of that. So it's a long way of saying we'll be bringing back to you these diagrams of where we think the subdistricts are within these areas of the two neighborhoods. And with that, I think I've gotten to everything. Dan, let's go to the next slide and go one more. So the question for your discussion is, do you support these design concepts? Are there any of them that you see some refinements or have some other ideas for as we move to our next stage of work, which is outreach with the community to draw alternatives? That's it. Back to you, Chair.
Great, thank you. That's a lot of questions we got in here, and I know we're short on time. Let's see if we can go quickly for each commissioner. Go ahead.
I may suggest, Chair, that as Joe said, maybe focus on areas of concern rather than areas. If you don't say anything, maybe we can assume that it's all good. So if there's specific areas of concern, maybe for time-wise, that may be where you want to focus your comments.
That's good. Yeah, Commissioner Mesbah, why don't you start us off?
I like the direction we're going. The areas of concern, I think, were brought up earlier. This is a good approach. Let's see how the meat starts being hung on this skeleton.
Great. Commissioner Tuzinski?
I agree with what Commissioner Mesbah said. It looks good so far. Any concerns I had have already kind of been brought up, except for I'd like to know more about the Grange and how that's going to be affected. But other than that, looks good.
The Willard.
Yeah, no special areas of concern. I like the connectedness and the walkability and the opportunity that you mentioned there. I think you're on the right track.
Commissioner Woods?
Yeah, Joe, I think you've done a good job here in giving us this overview, and I like everything that I've seen. I do have a question and a potential concern on the easement. High-powered lines run through the easement, is that correct?
Yes. Regional transmission lines.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So is there, and help me, and educate me here, working or doing things under these high-powered lines, is there any concern, any issues from safety, et cetera?
I'm not the best expert to speak to that. I can share what I've heard a little bit over the years is that there is some research that points to the noise that you hear, and you can hear some of the buzz as being a bit of a concern on any kind of actual, kind of electromagnetic health problem. I'm just not the right person to speak to that. I will say that it is very common throughout the Portland region, and I imagine elsewhere, that recreational uses and trails, at least, are part of the power line corridors. In fact, I don't think I've worked on a concept plan yet that didn't have them running through. And the other components that are, I guess, sort of more passive, like stormwater retention and so on, those, of course, I think would be at the low concern end of the spectrum relative to the power lines.
Okay. That's something, and I, for one, being someone who comes out of the electronics and high-tech area, that's a concern that I have. I like the ability, flexibility, if you will, of using that easement. And, I think about individuals putting together community gardens, etc. But if that is something that you could check on, you and Mr. Pauly, I would like to find out exactly what is the current thinking on that. But outside of that, I'm okay with everything else. It looks good.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Carr.
Yeah, I think what you've done here is really, really good. I'll give you a little bit, Mr. Commissioner Woods, about power lines close to your house, and that I have a park right by my house that is a park because it's under the power lines. The only concern that I've had as a resident that's within, 500 feet of the power lines is they do have the right to clear debris and growth from underneath these power lines. That's part of it. So where there's parks and things that are maintained, I don't see any problems at all. It's where it's unmaintained, like weeds and things. They'll come through and shred it. So as long as whatever is done in this area is not allowed to just grow uncontrolled, I don't think the easement is going to do that. As far as uses for like a park area, walking trails, I think it's a great use of that for that BPA easement. But yeah, everything else on here looks really good. I'm interested to see about the Grange and how obviously it's historic where it's located. So it would be nice if it could stay where it is. And if the widening of the road impacts the building, could the building be pushed back but still left in the same general vicinity as opposed to moving it?
Joe, if I remember correctly from the original Frog Pond Planning Task Force, I know that the Grange was talked about originally, and I believe that is not the original location for the Grange. Am I correct that it has been moved over time and it just happens to be at this current location right now?
Boy, memory does not serve for me on that. We're going to have to go check that out.
Okay.
Yeah, that would alter mine. If it's not the original and it's been moved here, then I don't have any problem moving it to a more convenient spot.
Yeah, Mr. Polly or Ms. Spatial might have some recollection on that. I recall hearing that, but there's lots of things in my head, so I might be wrong.
Yeah, and the property owner next door is on the line. So I would suggest anyways, we have property ownership representation from both those large properties in Frog Pond East on the line. So if the commission is open to it, they may have some comments that'd be helpful for the commission tonight. So I'll leave that to you, Chair, but staff would be supportive of letting them speak if they'd like.
Yeah, I'd be open to that.
So were there other comments, or would you like us to go ahead and bring on our audience?
Sure. Well, let's let Commissioner Gallagher provide her comments, and then we can open it up.
I don't have very many. I think you've done a wonderful job, and I think the idea of integrating walking in the park and all of that is just spot on. I do have a concern about the power lines. I have a question about cancer clusters. I don't know if it's related, but I certainly would feel better knowing that we've looked into any kind of health issues before we move forward on developing underneath it.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would second that. I think it would be good. I know I have heard of things around power lines and there being potential concerns, so it would be good to understand what that scientific consensus is around potential impacts. Exactly. I think, Joe, the only comment on my side, I like the road structure of connection idea 1. The more curving approach, it seems to be a more efficient use of the space. So if that could be integrated with the commercial node in the center, that seems like it would be a good combination in my mind.
Agreed.
All right, Mr. Polly, we can open it up to any feedback that we might have.
Let me stop sharing. And so Sparkle, Dan, or Maria, just raise your hand or let us know if you'd like. I know we didn't give you a lot of time to prepare, but if there's anything that's been on your mind as you've listened through this that you're ready to share with the commission.
I just moved.
Yeah, it looks like Sparkle had a hand up.
She did, so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and unmute Sparkle Anderson. She did have her hand raised.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I can tell you about the Grange. The original Grange Hall there was a school on the site where that Grange Hall is now, and the school was there, a one-room schoolroom, a house, and the Grange met in the attic for years. And then when they built the building that's there now, I believe in the 30s, they picked the school up and moved it down the road, and it became an extension building. So the Grange that's there is the new building at the old site.
Oh, okay. All right. Great. Thank you for that context. I appreciate that.
And I think that, I think it'd be a good idea to pick it up and push it back a little bit off the road.
Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. At this point, I do not see a hand raised by either Mr. Grimberg or Ms. Miller. Go ahead and raise your hand now if you would like an opportunity to speak to the commission.
All right, I'm not seeing any changes in hand raise, so I think we're okay. Mr. Polly, is there anything else that you want to bring to the commission's attention tonight?
No, just if there's any outstanding questions, we have the team here. If you have any questions for us before you log out. I was going to say go home, but you're already home.
Well, we might not be home. Maybe some people are. Who knows? All right, I'm not seeing anybody coming off of mute or indicating they are looking to provide additional comments, so I think we are okay. Thank you, Dan and Joe. Appreciate your work, and look forward to seeing the next round.
Thanks. We'll be back in June.
Great. Okay, moving to our last couple of items for informational. We've got the City Council action minutes from the 7th and the 21st, but no staff presentation. I'll wait for just 1 second, see if anybody has any questions or comments. And seeing none, last item is the PC work program for the rest of the year. Ms. Bateshell, anything of note that you want to talk to about that?
Not about the work program. I do have just one quick announcement before we finish the meeting.
Okay. I think I'm ready for that. I'm wondering if it may be aligned with a question I have, so let's hear it.
Great. Thank you, Chair Heberlein. So the announcement I have is I wanted to just briefly introduce the Planning Division's new administrative assistant, Mandy Simmons. So Mandy, if you don't mind, if you want to come up and sit where Dan was, she might be a little bit embarrassed. She's only been with us for 3 days. But you interface with this person a lot. As you know, Mandy will be supporting me and the planning staff and by extension the Planning Commission with the work that you do and these meetings. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to just meet her. We're very excited to have Mandy join the team. She is has a great background in senior administrative work. She also has an excellent background in teamwork. She was a Division I athlete in Michigan, and so we are super excited to have her join our team. She's got a great approach to teamwork and support, and just a great attitude and personality, and we are so excited to have her join the team. So I just wanted to have you all meet her, and you could extend a welcome and a hello. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. I may help her. And Mandy, if there's anything you would like to say, feel free, but you do not have to.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see all of you.
Welcome and hello.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Forward to working with you here in the future, and yeah, welcome to the city.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Chair. Did you have other questions you had for us? Was that the announcement you thought, or were you thinking I had a different one?
I was going to ask about our meeting next month and whether or not we were planning on continuing the virtual method, or are we looking at going back into City Hall?
Fantastic question. So at this point, we will remain virtual until the lobby construction is complete. And so I don't have an exact time frame, but it is looking like it is likely the June or July meeting. We were expecting to have the lobby complete by early May. However, you've heard this a lot, there are supply chain issues, and so we are behind schedule. So we're hoping to have construction complete early June, which to me means that we likely won't have a meeting in person until July, because we want to have an opportunity to notify you all of that, and not be telling you, days before your meeting that we would like to have you here. So probably July, but stay tuned, because if we've learned anything in the last 2 years, anything can happen.
Great, thank you for that. Well, good to know that we're making progress, maybe not as fast as we would like, but it's progress nonetheless.
I can say that when it is complete, it will look beautiful.
Great.
Is the chair providing muffins the first personal meeting we have?
You tell me what you guys want to have, and I'll bring it.
You will have to let us know if you want the coffee and cookies, because we used to provide coffee and cookies, but I don't know if the new commission likes. We have a lot of new commissioners, and I'm not sure if you want coffee and cookies.
Yeah, we may need a survey of what everybody wants at the meeting, and then I'll make sure to bring it for the first one, and then the city staff can take care of it after that. All right. Well, I don't see anything else on the agenda unless anybody else has anything. I'm ready for a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All right. And we don't need a vote for this, right?
Nope.
Awesome. Okay. I call this meeting adjourned at 8:22 p.m. Thank you very much, everybody.
Great job, Chair.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.